Tamas Cservenyak, Teaching Human Beings at Work. Act to Manage Books, Prologue. Let's dive right in. I've never been as bored in my life as I was in school and other formal training sessions. At the same time, it's also true that few things have brought me as much joy as learning. I'm far from alone in this experience. I dare say that humans are born to learn, and they do so eagerly until their enthusiasm is crushed, or they convince themselves that they're either incapable of learning or don't need it. Yet, even then, people get hooked on certain topics if something truly piques their interest, or if they develop a strong motivation to engage in a specific activity. For instance, my mother, who has been retired for decades, convinced herself that the only thing she could learn on her mobile phone was how to make calls, as she had no interest in the subject. On the other hand, my brother-in-law's mother, who is a few years older, mastered using a computer and Skype without any trouble so she could regularly communicate with her grandchildren living abroad. Not too long ago, science held the belief that humans are born with approximately 100 billion brain cells, which could be destroyed through various methods depending on one's talent and drive. However, before embarking on this downhill path, these numerous neurons start forming connections at a dizzying rate in the first few years of our lives, each establishing thousands of connections. The resulting neural pathways can easily break down, but due to genetic predisposition and environmental influences, some connections strengthen into multi-lane highways. These are surrounded by a myelin sheath, which makes them durable and allows impulses to travel up to 10 times faster. Thanks to these dominant neural pathways, we develop various talents. We've all experienced that in certain areas and activities. We feel more at home, learn faster, and derive more joy. For example, I'm not very good at logical thinking or tasks requiring it, and I was never a star in gym class. My son, on the other hand, quickly grasps maths problems and could do a somersault by his third try. My daughter has been effortlessly remembering texts since she was very young, something I could never do. I was driven mad by memorization tasks. However, I'm good at quickly extracting the essence from written material and putting my thoughts on paper. Moreover, I seem to be good at capturing people's attention when I talk about something I know well. It's in the areas of our natural talents that we have the greatest chance of building real strengths later on, provided we enhance our knowledge through learning and our skills through a large amount of deliberate practice. Everyone can learn and practice, but we can't acquire natural talents retroactively. However, we can identify them. I regret that I didn't get much help in this regard during my elementary and secondary education, and this isn't a unique phenomenon. In my senior year of high school, it seemed like a good idea to pursue a technical career as an obviously science-oriented kid, deduced from my lack of enthusiasm for literature or history, and applied to the mechanical engineering faculty. I was even admitted. But it soon became clear that I had no real interest in the natural sciences. Mathematical thinking was foreign to me, and all practical, technical matters left me completely indifferent. Total fuck-up. Am I really more humanities-oriented? This turned out to be the case, considering that I graduated from a teaching English as a foreign language program with a state scholarship year after year, have been working in the HR services field for over 2 decades, have been blogging for more than 10 years, and this is my 6th book. Before anyone thinks I'm licking my wounds, nothing could be further from the truth. However, I often think of an economic concept, opportunity cost, which I learned from my headhunter boss at my first full-time job. How much further ahead would I be now if I had realized at 19 that I had a place in languages, writing, or teaching? Of course, my father would say, if the dog hadn't pooped, it would have exploded, and he'd be right. But it makes a huge difference whether someone helps our children, young people, or even adult peers identify their affinities, where they can most likely develop their talents, or possibly find their calling. According to Picasso, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Our natural talents and dominant neural pathways don't make it impossible to learn things we have little innate aptitude for. For instance, last summer I took up stand-up paddleboarding, SUP. While my family members just needed to stand on the board and paddle, it took me almost a month of daily attempts to feel comfortable on the board and not freak out at every tiny wave. So, we can improve in areas where our neural pathways resemble neglected footpaths in the plains more than expressways. Since modern magnetic imaging devices, MRI, fMRI, have become available to researchers, we've learned a lot about how our brains function. First, we can learn new things throughout our lives thanks to neuroplasticity, which means new neural pathways continuously form in the brain and existing ones are rewired. Not to dispute that this becomes more challenging with age. Second, contrary to previous beliefs, new neurons also generate neurogenesis all along our lives, particularly in the hippocampus, a brain region significant for learning as it plays a role in memorizing complex information and spatial orientation. If we use our brand new neurons, they're more likely to survive. Interestingly, in addition to stimulation, exercise also significantly contributes to their survival. So, couch potatoing in front of the TV, which according to our National Statistical Office data, is a regular activity of people measured in hours daily, doesn't help avoid becoming senile. Humans are born to vacuum up information from everywhere, and where they have talents, their skills develop quickly, and their knowledge expands easily due to their natural curiosity. If they intend to and are persistent enough, they can learn many other things to some extent, although they're less likely to become top performers in those areas. It's worth observing the faces of both young and mature individuals when they suddenly understand something, acquire a new skill, or execute tasks more proficiently. The experience of competence is accompanied by joy and satisfaction, which in turn builds confidence noticeably. So why do so many people complain that it gets harder every year to motivate children to learn? Why do adults shy away from further training after obtaining their qualifications? Why does lifelong learning become an empty slogan for most people? I fear that it's mainly because the natural, joyful experience of learning is systematically screwed up by the painful, torturous, and deathly boring practice of teaching. Naturally, there are exceptions. Great and dedicated teachers, trainers, mentors, organizational leaders, and coaches. Unfortunately, they seem to be a tiny minority. Almost everyone regularly finds themselves in situations where they need to teach others, not just those who do this professionally in education or the workplace. Practically every leader's job involves developing colleagues, from supervisors to CEOs. Experienced employees are often entrusted with supporting the onboarding of newcomers. Engineers and experts conduct internal training to share the knowledge necessary for collaboration with other departments. IT professionals help others learn how to use digital tools and troubleshoot. Service and retail companies have the critical task of educating clients and customers to make the business relationship as fruitful as possible for all parties involved. For example, if a coffee distributor doesn't teach shopkeepers how to properly maintain coffee machines, malfunctions will become frequent, and sales will be interrupted until the service technician arrives. Lastly, parents are in teaching situations or supporting roles every day. How do these many people try to teach others? Typically by following the example they experienced as learners. As a result, people's stomachs churn when they hear they have to attend yet another training session. They collectively mourn the lost workday, and after the first hour of program, they can only think about whether to stab themselves in the belly or the crotch out of sheer boredom. Many have come to accept it as normal and natural that their children hate school. What's wrong with school and its teaching methods? Well, we have grown up to be decent people anyway, haven't we? Goes the folk wisdom. Yes, if I want to be cynical, I could say that we didn't turn into green algae or barn owls. If even more cynical, I might mention that many believe some of our fellow humans have moved significantly towards the cockroach or rat way of existence. But to approach the question seriously, I must highlight the difference between correlation and causation. We were taught this way, and we became decent people. The correlation between these two events is as high as possible, 1. Okay, but a good question is whether we became decent people because we were taught this way, independently of it, or despite it. The quality of school teaching matters not only in terms of content, i.e., what knowledge they try to impart, but also in terms of effectiveness, meaning how well the knowledge sticks in the learners' heads and whether they can use the acquired knowledge and skills directly or indirectly. Another critical factor is how much enthusiasm people have left for learning in the future, and what image they form of how to teach or help others learn. School experiences are significantly responsible for the fact that the effectiveness, results, and enjoyment factor of training sessions in adulthood, to put it mildly, aren't sky high. Unfortunately, outdated teaching methods are inherited. The goal of this ebook is to make the reader reflect on their teaching practices, whether they do it professionally, as part of their job, or in their private life. I don't intend to provide definitive solutions for reforming public education, even if it occasionally sounds like I'm criticizing it. I wouldn't be credible in this regard, nor do I have a comprehensive concept. I focus on the individual level, on how any of us could teach more enjoyably and effectively. So primarily, it's the world of work that provides the context for my thoughts, since this is my daily environment. Nevertheless, the main messages may reinforce those educators who haven't followed the mainstream and make those who are dissatisfied with conventional teaching methods, effectiveness, and students' motivation levels ponder. All the ebooks I've written so far have aimed to encourage the reader to increase their awareness and consciousness. The first 3 were about leading people, which can be done much better if managers apply the leadership, psychological, and behavioral science knowledge available to all of us, as well as the lessons of management innovation efforts in their daily work and not just operate instinctively. The 4th book was about leading ourselves, about how a more deliberate approach helps in more successful and happier life management. I wrote this 5th ebook with the mission in mind to encourage more people to consider how human beings learn instead of continuing to defy nature with outdated teaching methods. I'll share personal experiences, unfortunately, mostly as cautionary tales, from my time as a student in elementary and secondary school, as well as in college and further training sessions. I'll strive to share the teaching methodology knowledge and experiences I've gathered over the past 25 years, as well as what I've learned about the behavioral and neurobiological background of human learning. But before delving into how not to teach, let me tell you how I couldn't escape my life's mission, which seems to be teaching. How I failed to escape my life's mission. My parents, who taught in high school and college, warned me against only one career path, their own, not because they weren't dedicated educators who loved their work. However, the school organizational bureaucracy and the education system dampened their enthusiasm. Yet, it wasn't because of this that I never considered teaching as a career option. It was primarily due to something else. In neither primary nor secondary school did I encounter a teacher whose example I wanted to follow. Becoming like the models I saw wasn't an attractive prospect. In some cases, it even seemed like a downright terrifying vision. That's how I ended up on a brief visit to the mechanical engineering faculty of the University of Miskolc, as I previously recounted. After that fiasco, my family council, consisting of all members with a scientific mindset except me, decided that in this wasted school year, I should at least properly learn English. A local high school had been running intensive courses for years, 3 times 2 weeks with 10 hours of immersion a day. This training typically lifted most participants from an intermediate to an advanced level within a few months, successfully passing the state language exam. The group included both adults and students. For the first time in my life, I experienced a learning environment based on a partnership between teachers and participants. The many hours of hard daily work were varied and enjoyable, and the symphony of format, content, and teaching staff was not only well composed, but had been performed countless times and polished to excellent quality. The teaching staff divided tasks among themselves so that everyone did the work they were best at. Looking back, English teaching in primary school in the 1980s already used much more modern teaching methods than other subjects, at least those I personally encountered. Even our Russian teacher was professionally proficient, though he was as tough as diamond-reinforced steel, making us more fearful than fond of her. Yet, despite all my intentions and patriotic obstruction, by the summer of 8th grade, I could converse perfectly with the landlady on our Bulgarian seaside vacation, even though she only spoke her native language. Back to the English course, a guiding star lit up for me. From then on, I knew I had to become a language teacher who could deliver such awesome programs. Sandor Bota, one of the course founders, a few years later suggested that we should open a language school together someday. He might have seen something in me that no one else had before. Although things turned out differently in the end, my path almost led that way. At college, my previous image as a rebellious slacker transformed into that of a diligent student overnight, simply because I started doing what the teachers asked instead of ignoring it. Alongside my college studies, I started giving private lessons to children in my first year and later taught in a language school. It began when a classmate asked me to take over a group for the summer. Then, whenever the set term ended, the participants wanted to continue, and I received new groups as well. I taught more hours a week during college than I attended classes, even though I showed up for the most pointless lectures. I even wrote my thesis on teaching methodology, which in hindsight seems fitting. After graduation, an opportunity arose in the business world with a starting salary 3 to 4 times higher, which I took because I didn't see another way to build my own existence in the foreseeable future. Despite the company mainly focusing on executive search in the Central and Eastern European region and some HR consulting activities, the task of teaching soon found me there too. I worked as a researcher and then as head of research, responsible for training new colleagues and briefing new consultants on research activities and database potentials. At the time, I wanted to imagine myself more as a consultant and manager in a pristine business-like costume. No matter how well or enjoyable teaching English had been, the allure of the business world's glitz and paycheck thickness was far more appealing. Even though, apart from the money, I felt utterly out of place. The weight of responsibility, knowing my work's effectiveness determined multi-million revenues, weighed heavily on me. Then we took a bold step. A colleague and I founded a consulting firm and became a license partner of a large international company. Of course, business development, entirely foreign to me, seemed sexy, but our daily job was to support laid-off executives with funding from their former employer, helping them restart. We assisted them in handling their situation emotionally and conducting effective job searches. We used various methods: empathetic listening, knowledge transfer, advice, and later on, what we called coaching. In essence, I spent the next 9 years teaching, or more accurately, facilitating learning in this specific life situation. No matter how much I wanted to appear as a businessman, in reality, I converged back to teaching. The past 16 years have unequivocally been about facilitating workplace learning, specifically leadership development. I did this through complex corporate leadership development programs at client companies, almost 1,000 blog posts, 3 ebooks on leadership, and 1 on life management, altogether exceeding 190,000 downloads. In the past 10 years, we've also used the Act to Manage mobile micro-learning application, developed with my colleagues and external partners. It seems I can't stop teaching. My mind constantly buzzes with thoughts on how to better, more skillfully, and effectively promote leadership consciousness. Additionally, I prepare my colleagues to frequently experience the joy of growth with our participants and receive the most explicit recognition for their work when clients reorder from us. Recently, I looked in the mirror and admitted to myself that I'm essentially a teacher. Despite running businesses for 2 decades, that's just a side note. Hence, I dare to write a book about teaching. I pondered for 2.5 years on how to approach this topic. I didn't want to dictate reforms for public education since I've never worked in it. However, I felt that teaching children and adults was far too important to do it poorly on a large scale and long term, with a few exceptions. I deliberated for a long time whether general principles could be formulated. At the beginning of the year, a LinkedIn post called my attention to a MOOC course, massive open online courses, from U.S. universities. Although free online courses from prestigious universities have existed since 2008, my aversion to formal education held me back from enrolling in any. Yet, I took a deep breath and plunged in. The course from McMaster University and the University of California, San Diego, titled Learning How to Learn, had me feeling halfway through that everything we did differently from schools or other training companies, based on our experience and knowledge, was perfectly supported by modern learning theory, behavioral science, and neurobiology. So, one morning, while crawling towards a client at the Tatabanya Industrial Park in a traffic jam, I started typing the chapter titles into my phone. I would like to thank my constant collaborators for their repeated contributions, Orsolya Kamras for editing, and Chaba Pustai for the cover design. You might rightly think by now that there's been a lot of talking, and it's time to finally get into the meat of the matter. Well, you asked for it. How do we learn? There was a time when children were truly taught. Later, schools began transitioning to the industrial mass production model, where batches of uniform, same age, raw materials are pushed through a standardized manufacturing, curriculum delivery process. Instead of teaching children, they teach subjects, and rather than ensuring understanding, they simply deliver the material. Of course, there are exceptions. They dump information on the students like an injection molding machine, filling a collection bin with plastic parts. Clearly, this is still much better than having no public education at all before 1848, as it ensures that a larger portion of the population isn't illiterate, can acquire a trade to make a living, and the more ambitious ones can earn a degree. Moreover, after World War II, children from poorer families also gained this opportunity. However, it would be good if, more than half a century later, education could proceed in a somewhat more modern manner, especially now that we have a wealth of information about the functioning of the human nervous system. When we learn something new neural pathways form between our neurons. For those interested in more detail, our nerve cells' axon fibers connect with the dendrites of other nerve cells, but they do not touch directly. Instead, they connect through synapses, where chemical neurotransmitters convey the impulses. For learning to be successful and lasting, these newly formed neural pathways must be strengthened. Given that our working memory, mobilized by conscious concentration, has a rather modest capacity, able to remember 4 to 7, but typically closer to 4 units of information at once, our mind tries to chunk information. Try recalling a phone number if someone lists it digit by digit. It's much easier to remember if chunked, like saying Vodafone 356-8827. Chunking not only helps our working memory, but also our long-term memory, especially since we can create larger and larger chunks that we can later recall as units. This step-by-step construction of expertise allows for creative problem-solving. This applies not only to factual knowledge, but also to complex movements, such as how to backhand a tennis ball, thread a needle, or take the steps a child should follow automatically after using the toilet. Chunks form in our brains as networks of neurons that activate simultaneously when needed, greatly increasing efficiency and smoothness in actions or thoughts. These chunks can also form during self-directed learning, such as when a toddler figures out how to fit a round, triangular, or star-shaped plastic piece into the correct slot on a shape sorter. It might be a good idea to design teaching processes considering our knowledge of chunks. The first step in chunking is to give full attention to the information to be learned. The second step is practice because it helps us truly understand the concept, idea, or movement. Our brain tries to connect the new neural patterns to our existing ones, which spread across various brain areas. This shows that understanding requires doing something with the material, not just passive listening. The old Chinese were not fools. They observed without MRI that I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Moreover, our limited working memory fizzes out after a few chunks unless we start linking them to our existing knowledge. No wonder our intensive attention capacity is measured in minutes, not hours. However, understanding does not equate to knowledge. It is at best the illusion of it. Long-term learning requires more than just understanding. It necessitates a persistent effort. Just because I grasp the explanation of a math problem doesn't mean I can solve a similar one independently. The third step in chunking is creating context, which requires extensive practice through related and unrelated tasks to understand where and how the new knowledge can be applied. Understanding context involves seeing how new knowledge fits into the bigger picture and relates to previously acquired knowledge. Discussing with peers, reflecting independently, and explaining or writing it in our own words can be very helpful. Since humans are not machines but rhythmically functioning living organisms, we constantly need inhalation and exhalation, food intake and elimination, exertion and rest, to name a few examples. Learning doesn't happen by just pressing the accelerator and going full throttle endlessly. Two types of thinking are crucial for learning: focused and diffuse. We've already talked about focused thinking, where we concentrate on something, try to understand, or practice. Diffuse thinking is the apparent idleness. We rest, drink a coffee, take a walk, or shower, and suddenly the picture comes together, or we have an aha moment. Our brain organizes the new knowledge within the universe of our prior knowledge and experiences. Physical exercise is also a fantastic opportunity for diffuse thinking, aiding the survival of newly generated neurons, as mentioned earlier. Much of this book was conceived while swimming, cycling, and driving, all conducive to diffuse thinking. Then, of course, the focused part had to be hammered into the computer. Another key factor for learning is adequate sleep quality and quantity. Besides clearing certain toxins from our brain, sleep helps clarify learned thoughts, concepts, and actions, deepening and strengthening neural patterns and erasing much unnecessary information. Reviewing learning material before sleep increases the chances of dreaming about it, enhancing understanding. Professor Barbara Oakley says sleep plays a crucial role in solving difficult problems. It's like turning off the conscious part of our prefrontal cortex, allowing other brain areas to communicate more freely, forming the neural response needed to master the learning task while we sleep. However, sleep only aids learning if we've done focused work and had opportunities for diffuse thinking that day. Effective learning thus involves alternating between focused and diffuse modes, exercising, and ensuring restful sleep. Usable knowledge means we can recall information when needed and understand its practical application to solve emerging problems. Bridging the gap between ignorance and knowledge, as discussed, is relatively manageable for most people. What's much more challenging, especially regarding behavioral learning, is translating knowledge into action. Take, for example, achieving a desired body shape or weight. The related knowledge is easy to acquire. Consume fewer calories than we burn daily. If it were easy to implement, about 60% of the population wouldn't be overweight, with about half of that percentage being obese, according to relevant OECD surveys. Consuming delicious food and drink is enjoyable, easy, and convenient. Furthermore, human history has encoded in our genes the survival strategy of feasting when food is available. Even my parents' generation, especially in their childhood, unfortunately experienced hunger frequently. Physical exercise, however, is significantly less comfortable than lounging in a chair, and who has the energy for it after a full day's work, housework, and tending to children? Knowledge alone is insufficient if we can't translate it into action for various reasons, or if there's no opportunity to use it. Thus, teaching must include applying knowledge in practice, supporting habit formation, or facilitating these. And if we're teaching for the long term, we should choose content that is either practically applicable later or directly serves skill development, e.g., math problems for logical thinking, reading for comprehension and vocabulary expansion, arts for emotional development, discussions for argumentation, and balancing exercises for physical coordination. If we aim to help others learn effectively, we must consider how humans learn. Ignacio Estrada said, "If children cannot learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn." Unfortunately, the widespread teaching methods and practices suggest that educators largely ignore the knowledge summarized in this book so far, both in school and the workplace. In the next 10 chapters, I will use real-life examples to show how not to teach, and where I have better ideas, I will recommend them for consideration. I don't believe I have the philosopher's stone, but I am sure that if we approach teaching more consciously, thoughtfully, self-critically, and with more humility, considering scientific insights and investing more energy in preparing for our teaching tasks, we will achieve far better results and positively influence everyone's quality of life, including our own. Main part: how not to teach without a concept. My colleagues and I have a fundamental principle that we strictly adhere to, no matter what we undertake. It should rather be crap than without a concept. This saying was picked up by my colleagues from a vice president of technology at a television company many years ago, and we've kept it in mind ever since, whether we're dealing with training, change management projects, or product development. If we have a concept but it doesn't fully work out, we at least know what to adjust. Without a concept, our performance will be random, excellent, mediocre, or terrible, and we won't know how to refine the product. We've had numerous ideas that worked well, others that we improved step by step, and plenty that we had to discard because practice didn't validate them. We regularly ask ourselves why we're doing something, what we expect from it, why we're approaching it this way, and what our previous experiences show. And the list goes on. In my observation, it's rare for training sessions to have a well-thought-out concept, whether in schools or workplace trainings. I wouldn't call it a concept when someone writes out the main titles from a document or book, lists the key messages underneath, and then shoves the material down the poor participants' throats. Yet this seems to be the norm. In 5th grade, they teach these 2 mandatory readings. In 7th grade, they list the kings, battles, and dates of this era. In the project management training, they show these 250 slides to the glazed-eyed audience for 8 hours a day. Okay, but why? They don't finish the curriculum by June. They don't reach post-World War II history with the high school seniors, nor do they get halfway through the slide deck in workplace training because no one thought to fit the slides into the available time frame. No problem. Participants can read it in the textbook, and the presentation will be emailed. Great. Then, why not do the whole training without a training session? Personal presence is entirely unnecessary if they just read or recite the content aloud. A friend told me that in his postgraduate program, he heard the same presentation read 3 times by the same renowned expert, twice in his own class and once when the professor substituted for the same group. I wonder what other options he discarded to conclude this was the best. For example, let's take the high school literature education I experienced. I hope yours was different. The only possible concept behind it might have been the state-determined curriculum listing the poets, writers, and works to be taught chronologically in each grade. The teacher would come in, sit at the desk, and talk, mostly about whatever she felt like. She philosophized, reported on her travels, and when she felt like, she dictated the curriculum based on the notes in her spiral notebook. Occasionally, we looked at literary works, but rarely. We listened to what the poet meant to say according her notes, which we had to quickly jot down in addition to many biographical details. Naturally, we never reached the curriculum's expected end, and by senior year, we hadn't even touched on authors from the mid-20th century onward, let alone contemporary ones. I saw no trace of a concept then, or in hindsight. But to be fair, maybe there was an idea in the final year. Dictating the final exam topics for last-minute cramming, regurgitation, and quick brain disposal. This cycle worked well for me. Despite getting C's on report cards, I supposedly aced the final exam. At least, that's how my mother remembers it. My brain erased both the content and the grade at the graduation party. Yet literary works could have been used for so many things: practicing reading comprehension, illustrating poetic and literary tools, discussing life's big questions, fostering a love for a beautiful art form, practicing argumentation, pondering ethical dilemmas, developing writing skills through essays, and many other purposes. These opportunities were mostly missed. Here's a workplace story as well where a poorly thought out and unprofessionally prepared training not only missed opportunities but also caused harm. At a conference, an experienced, self-critical corporate HR director shared his traumatic failure, which she experienced as a relatively new leader. The experience was so impactful that she questioned whether continuing her leadership career was a good idea. There was nothing wrong with her qualities, as later life proved, and her self-reflection suggested. She simply fell for an unprofessional practice widespread in HR and training services. When she arrived as a new leader, the team was in turmoil. At the epicenter were two highly intelligent, well-performing colleagues with completely different temperaments in personal conflict. Taking the whole team to a team-building program seemed like a great idea, hoping it would solve the situation. The training provider probably welcomed the opportunity, either not thoroughly exploring the situation or being more game masters than organizational development experts, and came up with a super exciting, entertaining program. They went into the forest at night, paired up the team members, and had to gather various parts in the dark and then build something from them competitively, as competition famously fosters cooperation. You can guess who were paired together. I don't know what could have worsened the plan further, but this was enough. The athletic, highly performance-motivated team member got into the task and, with little patience for his more deliberate partner, raced ahead. In return, the other got lost in the forest, causing a scare for everyone. Two happy endings. The pair still won the competition, or rather, one half of the pair, and they eventually found the stray sheep. The leader, understandably, was devastated, questioning her suitability. The program contributed nothing to team cohesion or conflict resolution. Instead, rebuilding had to start from an even lower point. When preparing for a short or long-term training, few ask themselves the questions that would help create a concept. Here is a bunch to start thinking. Beware, it will seem daunting at first glance. But if you take the trouble to answer them, the training concept will come together in your mind. Why do you think the proposed training content and method will address the problem or need? Where do you want to take the participants by the end of the semester, course, training day, or session? What progress should they have made compared to their current state? How realistic is this goal? How will you determine that the participants have progressed? How much knowledge is reasonable to impart within the given framework? Is it even worthwhile to conduct training within that time frame? When, where, and how will the participants use the material, and what skills will develop as a result? How will you maintain attention? What teaching methods will you use to ensure this? What tasks will facilitate understanding? How will participants practice and apply the learned material sufficiently to strengthen new neural pathways? How should the semester, course, training days, or sessions be structured? What program structure will ensure that knowledge acquisition, practice, application in real situations, and reflection on experiences are all part of the process? What exercises and tasks will you use during training sessions? Why those specific ones? In what order? What do you expect from each task? How much time will you allocate for each activity? How will you account for the limited attention capacity of people? How will the program be engaging or at least varied and not boring? How will you plan training days considering people's, especially children's, fatigue as the day progresses? Does the program have internal coherence at the session, training day, and course levels? I am convinced that you cannot retroactively impose a concept on a training or development process. You need to set everything aside. Start with a blank slate and think through everything from the overarching big picture to the training script or lesson plan. Then, based on the experiences gained during implementation, continuously refine it. Remove, add, and modify as necessary. My personal experience is that we mostly remove and retain only what is truly important, works well, and is impactful. According to American novelist Gail Godwin, good teaching is 1/4 preparation and 3/4 theater. Without a concept, there's no good theater, and without good theater, there's no significant impact. Force feeding. Many people love foie gras, a pricey delicacy. Few think about the process that precedes the moment we enjoy that sous vide foie gras terrine. A goose's liver becomes unnaturally large by forcing enormous amounts of food into it. Traditionally, they are fed mostly corn-soaked and steamed in salt water, mixed with fat or oil for easier consumption. Some swear by additives like sugar, hot pepper, blue vitriol, and believe it or not, copper coins. Initially, the birds are force-fed twice a day, then 3 times, and the true pros do it 5 or 6 times from dawn till night, because shorter, more intense feeding brings better results. Industrially, for 3 weeks, they insert a 30 to 50 centimeter tube down the goose's esophagus into the stomach, force feeding them under high pressure in seconds. Quantity-wise, imagine a 75 kilogram person eating 15 kilograms of food daily, resulting in a 20 kilogram liver. After fattening, the bird must be slaughtered quickly, as its body would soon succumb to the torture. In education, the culture of intellectual force feeding prevails from elementary to higher education and extends to any workplace training. Despite the common saying that less is often more, people think education is of good quality only if they cram all available knowledge into the curriculum, burying participants up to their eyebrows in material and piling a 10-story avalanche on top. However, the human brain cannot store such amounts of single-use, never-retrieved data and information permanently. As previously mentioned, neural pathways must be strengthened through understanding-based frequent practice and later increasingly spaced repetition. This requires time, which isn't available because the next feeding session is imminent, so shut up and down goes the half-meter feeding tube. Public education has perfected this technique. For many subjects, the same content is forced down our throats in primary school, then even more extensively in high school. The general knowledge silo, defined by someone, I suspect decades ago, culminates in the final exams, where we temporarily inflate our livers with crammed knowledge to present to the committee. Afterward, we quickly shrink that battered liver with as much alcohol as possible, surviving the ordeal by forgetting 95% of high school material and sinking back into general ignorance. In higher education, this is honed to perfection. Not for nothing is it called higher education. Many instructors avoid even the pretense of teaching or test on something entirely different. Adult students are told to learn from the book. From a pile of books. That is, per subject, per semester. It's a full-blown bulimia nervosa of overeating and self-induced vomiting during exams. As a wine enthusiast, let me use the comparison of quantity versus quality wine consumption as a metaphor for two approaches to learning. Imagine visiting our Matra wine region with friends for a long weekend, a region primarily known for fresh, fruity white wines. Let's say we buy from the same two producers for Friday and Saturday evenings. Compare two alternative strategies. The first is the quantity approach. Each afternoon, we visit a cellar, ask which excellent wine they recommend for the evening, buy a 10-liter plastic canister of it, and following the old tradition, pour it into water glasses during our chat, and down it in one go with a hearty bottoms up. Then we ask our friend to refill with, "What's the matter, stingy?" We feel good, loosen up, and yell. The next day, we try to piece together the events from our collective memory with less enthusiasm and repeat the program on Saturday. Again, we have fun, but the next day is tougher, so we can't even think about wine for a while. The second option is the quality approach. We visit the same two renowned winemakers, but this time we do it differently. We taste each variety in tasting portions in beautiful wine glasses, starting with local varieties like Irsay Oliver and Chertsey Fuceres, then international ones like Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and maybe a Pinot Gris. And of course, we don't skip the rosé. Although not a red wine region, we might try a Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon as well. Meanwhile, the winemaker tells us a bit about the winery's history, the production and processing conditions of each grape variety, and a few words about the wine in our glass. We feel good, relax, and end up yelling here too. The next day, we eagerly go to the other winery, and while this version also requires recovery, we look forward to our next wine tour in another historical wine region. It's not hard to guess which approach provides more experience, will be remembered longer, and results in more lasting learning. We won't remember when the winery was founded or the load per vine or the fermentation temperature in the stainless steel tank, but we will retain more from the quality approach. If we choose to read just one book in a school year instead of 3 for upper primary students, but discuss the novel's events from different perspectives, write essays, perform a scene at the carnival, or even watch it in a theater or film, we can achieve much deeper learning with less content. If our leadership training day has 3 or 4 main messages that we explore from multiple angles, conduct memorable exercises related to these messages, and have leaders make specific commitments to try them in real life, and later we follow up on these commitments, it will have a far greater impact on their behavior than if we shared 30 smart ideas in a lecture format in the same time frame. A spectacular example of rejecting the quantity approach is Finnish public education, which ranked third in the 2018 PISA survey. In Michael Moore's documentary, Where to Invade Next, which won Emmy and Oscar awards, he interviews the Finnish education minister, experts, and several teachers about the reasons behind their success. They start with two important principles: no homework and only 20 hours per week for young children. I made a small collage of quotes from the teachers, which illustrates their prevailing mindset. The brain needs rest. If it's constantly working, it stops learning. And this is useless, especially over a long period. When do they have time to play, meet friends, and grow up as humans? There's much more life around them than school. I want children to play. We try to teach them everything so they can use their brains as they wish. This includes physical education, arts, music, anything that stimulates their brains to develop. Children need baking, singing, dealing with arts, and going into nature. We try to teach them to think for themselves and be critical of what they learn, to be happy people, respectful of each other and themselves. School is about finding your happiness, more precisely, what makes you happy. Despite their effectiveness, they don't seem to be arrogant. Finnish physics teacher Pekka Peura gave a lecture in my hometown a few years ago. He believes that Finnish schools are bad in many ways and need improvement, but their strength lies in their openness and readiness for continuous innovation. I think we might be the best because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, he said with modesty. Corporate onboarding programs also tend to overload newcomers with information over a week, causing them to lose track and focus on survival after a day or two. Programs that spread out information over time and allow new hires to apply what they've learned in practice, tying safety or procedural rules to something practical, consider the nature of human learning much more. William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet and playwright, pointed out a century ago that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. Sadly, it seems his message still hasn't been fully embraced. Without selection. There was a time, say half a century or more ago, when a teacher's most important task in a village was to teach the children to read, write, and do arithmetic, as one of the few literate individuals there. Then they had to pass on the knowledge available to them. Books were not easily accessible, so there was a heavy emphasis on knowledge transmission. However, this drastically changed later on. It began with the increasing accessibility of books. During my childhood in the 1970s and 1980s, my parents, even on their teachers' salaries, could afford to fill our bookshelves. In my profession, 15 to 20 years ago, fresh professional literature had to be procured from abroad, but in the past decade, either the ebook versions can be downloaded with a click, or the most important new books are published in local languages within a year. Simultaneously, especially in the past 20 years, the internet exploded, making virtually anything learnable online, often for free. My children could independently find the necessary information for their school presentations in no time, whether they are researching the Circus Maximus or the characteristics of the black bear. Shameful as it may be, recently we were unable to show our children how to do long division with multiple digits. None of us remembered, as it had been over 25 years since I last used this skill. That evening, we went to a social gathering with our family, where I shared my problem with the attendees, including engineers and economists. None of them could recall how to do it either, but one had the Photomath app on their phone for similar reasons. I had never seen such a thing. You photograph the math problem, and the app explains the solution step by step in several languages. Teachers are not primarily needed in the 21st century to impart knowledge because knowledge is already accessible to everyone, at least in the developed world. Instead, teachers and workplace trainers have an even more important and challenging role than before. First, they need to help students, during their self-directed learning, to sift valuable knowledge from the mass of nonsense alongside credible information. Second, they They need to design thoughtful, concept-based, modern learning processes that provide a framework for knowledge acquisition and practice, and in better places, even for the development of emotional and social skills, which are equally important in today's world. Third, they must act as knowledge curators, selecting the necessary elements from the vast array of available information for the given age group, context, and learning objectives. In my field, for example, there are so many leadership books that you could fill the Amazon River and probably even soak up its water with them. Moreover, many valuable books have been written on the subject over the past decades, with several becoming international bestsellers. Despite this, when asked if I could recommend an easily digestible book to help a novice leader navigate, I couldn't name a single one. So, I wrote one myself in 60 pages. I didn't invent anything in it. The list of sources is at the end. I simply acted as a knowledge curator. I distilled the essence from many valuable contents, mixed it with my own experiences, and described it in an understandable, everyday language for interested readers. It seems there was a demand for this type of dissemination, as it has been downloaded over 100,000 times. When we put together training programs, this is also our task. We filter from the available wealth of useful thoughts, theoretical models, practical methods, personal experiences, and countless related studies what best fits the size and goals of the training. So, what criteria should be used for selection? Let's start with choosing content that is understandable and accessible to the learning group. This is greatly influenced by the student's age, but can also be determined by the training participant's qualifications or prior experience. Again, drawing from my own experience with elementary school literature classes, I may have always been dull, but I didn't really understand most of the poems presented, so enjoying them was out of the question. Neither their language nor their themes were easy to understand. Thus, I didn't like them. However, I enjoyed good song lyrics a lot the more poetic they were, and I still love them today. These, too, are often poems but were closer in theme and style to a young person's world. Reading has been dear to me since childhood and remains so, except for the books I was required to read in school. Not that they lacked value, they were simply meant for a different age group. Some I read later as an adult and appreciated greatly. What if teachers chose works that were understandable and enjoyable for the age group? Fortunately, there are examples of this here and there. The next criterion is whether the participant will be able to use the acquired knowledge in the near future. If not, then the training is not very relevant at the moment. The content won't be tied to anything, leading to forgetting. As I mentioned earlier in the book, from a neuroscience perspective, lasting learning requires that we connect new knowledge to our existing blocks and strengthen new neural pathways through practice. If this doesn't happen, the whole thing will quickly be discarded. Here are some examples. In higher education, the curriculum for economics majors and non-executive MBA programs, and even engineering master's programs, includes management subjects. Students also pass exams on these, completely unnecessarily. Unfortunately, they can't use any of it because they are typically not in leadership positions, and many haven't even seen a workplace from the inside. So it's utterly pointless to burden them with this. Later, when after a few years of practice, they are entrusted with team leader tasks, they are bewildered about what to do as leaders. But when they really need it, their company might not provide such support. The same goes for corporate project management training, which only makes sense if the participant leads projects or at least participates in them and can try out how a structured approach aids project success. Without this, no one will remember years later what they learned, and they won't feel like flipping through a 600-page manual. There is also the possibility for the training content not to be determined top-down or externally, but to learn from peers who do something very well. The Carpetrite Company, which employs 3,000 people in 420 retail stores, identified salespeople who consistently achieved good results with certain products, distilled their knowledge into 3-minute videos, and these snippets could be viewed by colleagues on their mobile phones. During the 9-month program, the salespeople experienced an average 13% increase in sales of the products involved. adjusted for seasonality. The content proved to be relevant and well usable. In school, of course, we don't just learn things we will directly use later, and that's partly okay. But it's at least questionable which parts of the curriculum are worth teaching at all. It is certainly useful if learning contributes to the development of some necessary skill. These include logical thinking or calculation skills, reading comprehension, verbal and written expression, overview ability, argumentation, or general knowledge for navigating the world. I also think more critically here because, for example, I would prioritize map navigation over covalent bonding. I won't reform education in a few pages, as I promised earlier. But if we decide to teach, whether as a profession or occasionally, let's at least ask ourselves what the unfortunate learner will use this material for, or if for nothing, what skill we are developing with it. I wouldn't necessarily list enduring monotony, disciplined boredom, feigning attention authentically, or sleeping with open eyes as essential skills to be honed. One-size-fits-all approach. In clothing, besides the usual sizes of S, M, L, XL, and so on, there exists the so-called one-size-fits-all, supposedly designed to fit any body type. While this seems an ambitious goal, it might be adequate for something like a rain poncho. However, the list of clothing items where this simple-to-manufacture and distribute solution makes most customers happy would not be long. The same principle applies to learning. Bespoke tailoring is expensive and scarce, making it a luxury few can choose over off-the-rack items. Now, let's shift our focus from outerwear to shoes. It's hard to argue against the need for some form of last in shoemaking, as shoes should ultimately be foot-shaped. It would be hard to walk in shoes shaped like a 9-pointed star or an elephant's trunk. Yet, in terms of usability, it makes a significant difference which size from 36 to 46 we get. While my examples might seem obvious, it's not common practice in education and workplace training to pay particular attention to this aspect. As mentioned earlier, our genetics and early environmental influences endow us with unique talents, with significant individual differences in our skill portfolios. Some can complete arithmetic tasks in moments, then spend half an hour fidgeting or causing trouble while the slowest ones catch up. Those who are fast in math may never catch that speedy peer in a game of tag. With the vast range of activities and associated abilities in school and life, it's easy to see that within any learning group, everyone has different affinities in which they can grow quickly. An exciting difference between people is that those who are above average in intelligence often have larger working memory, aiding tasks requiring calculation or logical thinking. Conversely, those with slightly smaller working memory can more easily form new, creative combinations. According to Barbara Oakley, this is because their working memory, which draws from the focusing abilities of the prefrontal cortex, does not hold everything tightly. Thus, input can more easily come from other parts of the brain. Therefore, we should appreciate this quality in smart people and accept that creatives might be less focused or quick-witted, but honor their creative abilities. I once saw a great cartoon illustrating the difference between equality and equity. In the equality image, 3 children of varying heights stand on the same type of box, trying to see over a fence to watch a soccer match. The tallest could see over, while the others only saw the fence planks up close. The equity image depicted a stepped platform by the fence, with the smallest child on the highest step, the others progressively lower, allowing all to watch the game. It's important to see that there are no inherently smart or dumb children. Instead, we need different steps for different areas of aptitude. Numerous U.S. experiments with disadvantaged children have shown that excelling in one strength can lift performance in other learning areas. Fair and effective education does not mean everyone gets the same treatment in every subject, but that those needing more help receive it, and those requiring different methods are taught accordingly. Fairness isn't just about helping the less capable. It's also about allowing diligent children or training participants with exceptional abilities in a given area to develop their skills fully and take steps 2 or 3 at a time. They should receive extra tasks, learn more advanced content, and progress faster. My children were on their nth session to learn swimming, doing quite well, but we still didn't feel confident in their skills. Despite having beginner, intermediate, and advanced groups, there's considerable variation within them. We discussed with the instructor how our son could swim more, as he's doing well and intense practice would benefit him. The instructor said it's no problem. While others might swim 2 or 4 lengths, he swims 6. Similarly, in school, some children receive extra tasks for specific subjects, so instead of finishing quickly and disrupting the class, they stay occupied, use their energy constructively, and develop more steadily. Okay, but am I saying there shouldn't be a basic level everyone must achieve? Of course not. Determining the general last is not simple, but very important. As a parent, it's a no-brainer that in primary school, everyone should learn to write well enough to take notes during live speech, read age-appropriate texts with comprehension, write 1 or 2-page essays on given topics, either from memory or after some research, perform basic arithmetic operations, and translate real-life situations into mathematical problems and solve them. It would also be great if they regularly engaged in physical exercise, helping maintain newly formed neurons without coming to hate it. Some children struggle and feel ashamed in traditional PE classes due to their physique or motor skills, though it needn't be this way. As a parent, I also want the arts to aid my children's emotional development. Drawing, painting, music, or even performing stories. We shouldn't fear that there are no prodigies in the class and the products aren't world-class. That's not the goal. Everyone can engage in artistic activities at some level, especially with guidance and regular practice. Minimums can be set for different subjects, like identifying towns or rivers on a map, or recognizing historical events, people, or artists that an 8th grader should at least have heard of. In my own field of leadership training, I've clearly defined the minimums that form the basic last. It doesn't matter if it's an engineer leading technicians, a beginner manager, a middle manager, or a director. The basics are the same, and even deputy CEOs often fail not because they didn't keep up with the latest Harvard Business Review issues, but because they can't give proper feedback or spend any time with their direct reports. Knowing that good performance management requires setting quality goals involving their colleagues, tracking those goals regularly, providing supportive feedback, and occasionally taking time to review and plan increases the chances of eliciting strong performance from the team. Naturally, this is only effective if it's not just known but practiced. We have several such packages every leader should learn and turn into habits. However, determining how an individual applies what they've learned about performance management or supportive communication in their own work context must be personalized. It matters what field they work in, how many subordinates they have, their qualifications, the type of work they do, how much leadership experience they've accumulated, and the company's leadership culture. Therefore, we provide individual follow-up components in our leadership development programs for clients. Besides group training, individual consultations are needed to facilitate the trial, practice, and embedding of what's been learned. In summary, it's crucial to define the minimum level all participants must reach. A well-designed and implemented training program must also support those who struggle and provide goals and resources for those who excel. It might be easy for a trainer teaching adults at work to do this, but differentiating instruction in large classes seems to be very difficult despite decades of discussion in pedagogy, with action only from truly dedicated teachers. Large class sizes can be used as an excuse, but examples of differentiation exist in 25 to 30 student classes. Not to mention that in subjects taught in smaller subgroups, class size is not an obstacle. If teaching and educational work are seen solely as conducting lessons, the task is indeed difficult. But if committed teachers treat their work as a vocation and are fully present at school, they generally find space for individual attention and guidance. Corporate trainers must convince clients that their intervention shouldn't be mere force-feeding, but must include elements that allow tailoring the learning process. Yes, this makes training more expensive, whether done internally or externally. However, it is a key element to be meaningful and have a real impact. Exclusively frontal teaching. Human attention spans are remarkably limited. With a healthy teenager or corporate training participant capable of passively listening to a lecture for a maximum of 15 to 20 minutes. School-aged children can manage 10 to 15 minutes at best. It's no coincidence that the famous TED Talks are capped at 18 minutes, despite featuring engaging topics, stories, professional presenters, and meticulous preparation. This doesn't mean we can only manage one such 15-minute stint per day. Focused attention can be reset with breaks, different activities, and renewed focus within certain limits. However, expecting continuous intense focus and note-taking for a 45-minute lesson or a 90-minute training session is nearly hopeless. Even movies, which manage to hold interest for such lengths, do so with the help of a vast team of experts working for months or even a year, weaving intricate stories, casting professional actors, using stunning sets and digital visuals, employing experienced directors and cinematographers, and finalizing the product on the editing table. How can a 2-hour university lecture possibly compare? If you genuinely want to teach others something, forget the classic image of the instructor standing at the podium or sitting behind a teacher's desk, delivering wisdom. Neurobiologist Terence Sinowski warns us that fuller understanding comes from the mind building the patterns of meaning, rather than simply accepting what we've heard from others. Remember, people learn by trying to interpret the information they receive. We rarely learn complex things just by having someone explain them. So-called frontal knowledge transfer, where the instructor dispenses wisdom, should be limited to 5 to 10-minute doses because that's as long as people can focus in one go. It's not always necessary to speak. The same content can be read by participants or shown in a short video if you find one relevant to the material. You can provide observation points or tasks related to the content. Discussing the material together is already a vast improvement over frontal lecturing. For instance, write the steps of a process or elements of a model on the board, show a dataset or diagram, and ask participants how they would interpret the information on the board or why they think the model suggests steps in that order. Texts read from a handout, artworks, or data tables can be discussed from various angles or questions. If students immediately do something with the material, it aids understanding and starts linking new learning to existing neural pathways and information chunks. This approach can be challenging with larger groups and typically more active learners dominating the discussion. However, this too can be managed. If there is active engagement and discussion, the frontal, large group processing of the knowledge element can extend a bit longer, perhaps up to 15 minutes. Afterward, it's important to switch activities. To deepen learning, it is essential that participants practice with the material. Tasks are excellent for diversifying learning and re-engaging attention for the next knowledge transfer segment. Variety can be wonderfully facilitated by different work methods and exercise formats. Students can work alone, cooperate in pairs, trios, or small groups. It's also a good idea for individuals to discuss their work with one or more people, or for small groups to bring their findings to the larger group. Processing larger amounts of material can be done if pairs or groups tackle different topics and present them to the rest. We don't always have to start with knowledge transfer. Exercises can come first and conclusions drawn from them. These activities can be done individually or in various group sizes. Learning with others helps identify flaws in our thinking, and explaining to others develops our understanding. As sci-fi writer Robert Heinlein said, "When one teaches, two learn." Jeffrey Karpicki, a cognitive psychology professor at Purdue University, highlighted that retrieval as a learning technique is much more effective than rereading, making it worth incorporating into teaching. Barbara Oakley also champions variety. Learning new material isn't just about acquiring basic information chunks, but jumping back and forth between problems and situations requiring different techniques and strategies. This method is called interleaving. While practice and repetition are essential for building stable neural patterns, interleaving develops flexibility and creativity. 45 or even 90 minutes can pass surprisingly quickly if participants are continuously engaged in activities related to the material. It's clear that these exercises and activities won't create themselves and require much more preparation effort from the instructor than reading notes or PowerPoint bullet points. However, the payoff in teaching effectiveness and participant motivation is well worth it. Framing learning sessions is also crucial. It's helpful to reference the previous session at the start of a lesson or day, recalling what was learned before. Participants should also see early on what they will cover that day and what to expect. This is an excellent opportunity to spark interest, though it requires thought on what might pique the participants' curiosity. Wrapping up and summarizing at the end of a lesson or training day is beneficial, as it lays the groundwork for future use of the knowledge. In my experience, adult training participants can manage no more than 90 minutes or perhaps 105 minutes, even in varied and interesting training sessions, after which they need at least a 15-minute break. The younger the children, the shorter the lessons can be, regardless of the standard 45-minute school periods. Consideration must also be given to meals, hydration, and for adults, coffee, smoking, and phone breaks. A lunch break of at least 45 minutes is needed, followed by the post-lunch slump when the body focuses on digestion. Activity planning for this period is critical. Passive lecture listening is least suitable at this time. Learning and paying attention are tiring activities. Ideally, a half day or 3/4 of a day is sufficient even for adults. An entire day's training will likely see everyone exhausted by the last block, including the instructor, necessitating appropriate program adjustments. Methodological variety is essential for sparking interest and maintaining attention. When planning a lesson, training program, or an entire semester's curriculum, it's vital to include how the material will be processed and how participants will practice. Failing to do so means you might as well send in the textbook or presentation, as your presence wouldn't add much value. Without any fun. The Spiral Notebook and I are eternal, sworn enemies. If I'm ever appointed Minister of Education, one of my first actions will be to ban it. Spiral notebooks have been responsible for one of the most devastating massacres in history, the premeditated mass educational slaughter by boredom. In high school, for example, we learned chemistry from a teacher who would take out her spiral notebook and read us a slice of this exciting branch of natural sciences. Occasionally, she would write on the board when it was too cumbersome to explain something verbally, such as chemical formulas and reaction equations. However, the spiral notebook-based teaching method was not limited to high school or natural sciences. University English literature lectures by a bearded individual whose name was feared far and wide also used this dangerous weapon to destroy our desire to learn and live for an hour and a half every week. Across the street, in the high school where my mother taught chemistry, the approach was radically different. She persisted or schemed until the administration agreed to order a continuous supply of chemicals, enabling not only her to conduct demonstration experiments, but also allowing students, in pairs, to experiment themselves during split classes. She recently recounted that even at 30 or 40-year class reunions, her former students still reminisced about the time she brought boiled eggs and sausages to demonstrate single, double, and triple bonds. Her students certainly did not escape encountering reaction equations, but at least they experienced firsthand what happens behind the scribbles. To be fair, both teaching approaches produced small scientists who excelled in academic competitions and successfully passed entrance exams to chemistry faculties and medical schools. However, the experience of the remaining 90 to 95% differed significantly. For years, I frequently encountered people in my hometown who turned out to be my mother's former students, some of whom had even failed chemistry. Yet none of them ever sought revenge by inviting me outside for a fight. Instead, they remembered her with love and respect, and sometimes even bought me a beer. I have to dig deep into my memories to recall classes where we had any memorable experiences. Learning is significantly aided when we can use our senses more intensively than just copying what's written on the board or taking notes on what's said. Memory traces become more lasting if the information is associated with vivid, sensory experiences, going there, seeing it, doing it, experiencing it, etc. Moreover, the emotional impact of these experiences further strengthens retention. Positive emotions, a sense of success, feeling competent, playfulness, good humor, all these favor long-term memory retention. Our emotions have a major impact on our learning. Emotions were previously thought to be separate from cognition, but recent research shows that emotions are linked to perception, attention, and are related to learning and memory. The amygdala, an almond-shaped structure located at the base of the brain, is a center where cognition and emotions effectively integrate. People can learn effectively when they favor the amygdala, says Professor Tamas Cservenyak. Additionally, knowledge gained through practical exercises and real-world applications is significant. It already adds some fun factor if participants do something instead of just sitting and staring. Tasks that are enjoyable to do or where there is some surprise, lesson, or aha moment at the end can be truly great. Working with real-life elements clearly increases enjoyment. Counting with nuts for children or doing coaching exercises with real situations for leaders is far more enjoyable than working with abstract concepts and role-playing exercises. My children will never forget when they performed Greek or Norse mythology stories with their classmates or sang a song from a musical in front of 100 incredulous, goosebumped, and teary-eyed viewers. However, all this takes time, which can only be produced by cutting back on quantity. Humans have excellent visual and spatial memory systems, which can be effectively leveraged in learning situations. Throughout evolution, it was crucial to remember where things were and what they looked like. This was a matter of life and death for the hunter-gatherer Homo sapiens, which humanity has been for most of its history. Even today, despite GPS navigation, these memory systems haven't atrophied beyond repair. Long-term memory is aided if we link memorable visual elements to what needs to be remembered. The image or thought must be memorable. Demonstrations, analogies, and metaphors are very useful for this. The more visual and unusual they are, the better. The previously mentioned boiled egg and sausage are excellent for teaching chemistry, but humor often relies on analogies too. We should ask ourselves, when conveying new information, if it resembles other everyday things, events, or processes. For example, an ogre is like an onion. It has layers. This analogy did not work out for Shrek when trying to teach Donkey, and he had to end the conversation with frustration. "No, you dense, irritating miniature beast of burden. Ogre's like an onion. End of story. Bye-bye. See you later." Perhaps now the big two-legged green creature and his bumbling four-legged friend will help you remember how important analogies and metaphors are in teaching. Yes, it is a hassle to come up with something for every training session that engages participants beyond their intellect, targeting their senses or emotions as well. Train your creativity as a teacher, educator, or trainer. Look up how others do it. Borrow ideas from other fields, bring everyday objects, or use completely bizarre metaphors. I regularly bring plush animals to training sessions, toss thick markers to participants to catch and then kick the returned marker somewhere in the room. And once even began a professional conference presentation by playing an Irish folk song on the flute. If sample questions need to be collected, I create groups and make a competition out of it. I summarize the results solemnly and then either reward the winners with a candy bar or declare a draw with a whimsical multiplication factor. Film clips and short videos work wonders. Years later, my participants still talk about our active listening exercises from our deliberate leadership program because they had such a profound impact on them. If you don't make the effort to add some color, the end result will be at best mediocre, whether it's pleasant to read this or not. Without deliberate practice. Not so long ago, in 2008, 2 important books were published in the USA, both studying exceptional achievements. They approach the issue from slightly different perspectives, making them complement each other perfectly. In his book, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell explains that if we scratch the surface, it turns out that behind every truly outstanding performance lies at least 10,000 hours of practice, whether in computer programming, science, sports, or any art form. Jeff Colvin's book, Talent is Overrated, adds that it's not just the quantity of practice that matters, but the quality. Professional skills don't develop merely by repeating something often or doing it for a long time half-heartedly. Specific sub-skills need to be systematically honed to higher levels, gradually raising the bar. Let me note that this isn't about the often touted cliché that one must step out of their comfort zone to improve. Unless your comfort zone ends where you have to get up from the couch for the remote or the next cold beer, but rather about progressively pushing the boundaries of your abilities with intense repetition, dedicating 4 to 5 hours daily, nearly every day of the week, with only a few rest days. This is how someone can become exceptional. But I must add the insight from positive psychology that this is most likely where they have some innate talents. However, research clearly disputes the all-encompassing power of innate talent. To reach world-class levels, talent must be built upon in the manner described above. Even diligence or self-motivation doesn't seem to be innate. Appetite for hard, well-structured practice generally develops during the process, often guided by coaches or masters, though some individuals can construct their own learning processes. Most people don't have such peak ambitions, but considering how our nervous system works, long-lasting knowledge, apart from what's gained through trauma, requires extensive practice. Strengthening neural pathways, quick retrieval of information chunks, and the development of automatisms don't happen with just a single load of information. As I mentioned before, the concept of training and development must include the planning of practice and real-life application, just as fundamentally as defining the content of the training. In our leadership programs, nearly half of the budget and the involvement of facilitators and coaches go into individual follow-ups, with the other half dedicated to group training. Stripping away all niceties, I must say that trainings composed solely of knowledge transfer elements are almost worthless. It's slightly better if there's some practice during the training or class itself, but the only chance to retrieve knowledge elements from our long-term memory in the appropriate context is if we repeatedly, albeit in smaller time frames, revisit it with increasing repetition intervals after the teaching. But we don't usually do it that way, many might exclaim. I know, that's why I'm struggling with writing this book, hoping more people will adopt a different approach. It sounds good, but when? A legitimate question. Certainly not by giving even more homework to already overburdened children or to corporate training participants juggling multiple roles. Miracles don't happen here. The content to be delivered must be halved, and half of the contact sessions should be dedicated to practice and reflecting on the acquired experiences. In workplace training, this needs to be explained to the client. In schools, the only option is to be punk. Follow your own path, and if you get called out, apologize profusely. Before declaring this impossible, I know of past and present brave teachers in both village schools and elite high schools who defy official expectations and teach according to their conscience in ways they believe best serve the children's interests. Though it doesn't offer a universal solution, some educators can choose to continue their careers in schools where this spirit prevails. Such schools do exist. Another option, especially in corporate training, is to connect the learning material directly to everyday work activities, so participants can try and practice the new knowledge in their daily tasks. This is feasible in many professional, process-related, soft skill, and leadership trainings. Subsequent contact sessions should then allocate time for discussing experiences and resolving difficulties. I'm certain that expecting results from one-off educational, information-loading sessions is futile. Not even in terms of long-lasting, usable factual knowledge acquisition, let alone skill development or behavior change. Yet, this terrifyingly widespread practice persists. Without connection among children, it's often observed that the favorite subject in a class is the one taught by the teacher they like the most. While one group may surprisingly favor math, another may prefer physical education or English. This preference is not determined by the inherent attractiveness of the subject or the individual aptitudes of the children. A brief exploration into this phenomenon, whether locally or globally, reveals relevant quotes from esteemed and wise thinkers. Carl Menninger, an American psychiatrist and author, stated, "What the teacher is more important than what he teaches." Renowned Hungarian educator Sándor Karacsony emphasized that, in education, It's not the systematic teaching of scientifically verified knowledge that matters, though that too, but the basic educational relationship, the social psychological connection between educator and student. Dr. James Comer, an American child psychologist, asserted, "No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship." Rita Pearson, with 40 years of teaching experience, put it simply in her 2013 TED Talk, "Kids don't learn from people they don't like." And the same applies to adults at work, as I would add. David Fernandez, a Spanish teacher training expert, and his filmmaker partner Amaya visited Europe's most innovative schools to make a documentary. In an interview in Budapest, when asked if there was anything similar they noticed in these diverse schools, he replied, "If I had to highlight one thing, it would be that the best schools try to rehumanize education. They focus more on human relationships and help in the inner development of individuals. It's more important that students feel good and let their passions guide their learning. The content of the curriculum or the development of factual knowledge is not the main focus. The key element of learning is the relationship between teachers and students and among students themselves. A teacher or trainer who merely delivers content, whether in schools or corporate training, only utilizes a fraction of their teaching potential. They aren't truly trying to teach the participant. Without knowing their student, without stepping closer, they have little chance of success. Reflecting on my own experience, I can recall very few teachers who showed any curiosity about me. The list would fit on a really small piece of paper. However, anyone fortunate enough to encounter such an individual, whether in school, sports, or the workplace, who was genuinely interested, believed in them, and supported their personal growth, will remember them with gratitude for life. In her talk, Rita Pearson quotes Stephen Covey, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." Broadcasting information like a radio and grading students' performance is relatively simple. Helping someone advance in their learning from where they currently stand requires significantly more effort. Brother Chababote, a Franciscan friar and head of the St. Francis Foundation of Deva, is involved in the education and upbringing of thousands of disadvantaged children. In a recent interview, he stated, "A teacher's task is to bring out a child's self-belief and confidence. I tell our educators, you are not a beauty pageant jury to rate a child as a 5, 10, or 6. Most children are beneath the frog's bottom, that's apparent. To see the next József Attila, famous Hungarian poet, in them. That's the challenge, to see the wonder in them and bring it out. It's really great when you can bring out the strength and momentum from a child, an adult, or a colleague." But how could an educator achieve this without making an effort to know their student? And why would a student trust them if there's no meaningful human connection? As previously discussed, effective educational processes must include an individual component. This allows for building relationships with participants, mutual understanding, calibrating personal knowledge and skill levels, setting individual tasks and goals, and making the acquired knowledge useful and relevant to the individual. If someone is not behaving as they should, do you take the time to talk to them? Or do you just give them a failing grade? Report them to their homeroom teacher, principal, parents, or superior? In high school, I was quite a troublemaker. Yet, I have no memory of any teacher pulling me aside to discuss why I was behaving the way I did or how I should conduct myself instead. Building a relationship involves rolling up your sleeves and tackling the tough conversations. Instead, I received subject grades meant to regulate behavior and was sent to various places as punishment. No relationship was built, only lasting resentment, distance, and further alienation. As a trainer, teacher, or workplace leader, you can truly impact others, not just with high-quality teaching materials and modern methods, but with your full personality, professional commitment, attitude, passion, and enthusiasm. The impact you make will determine whether only the most motivated and diligent participants will develop, or if many others will as well. I'm not claiming that you will engage 100% of the participants or students, but you have the opportunity to inspire the majority. They need to feel that they matter to you, that you genuinely want to help them, and that you believe in their abilities. They also need to sense that the subject is exciting, important, and worth getting enthusiastic about. If you don't show enthusiasm, why should anyone else? In our own team, we observed that for running our leadership development programs, we don't primarily need qualified trainers or educators. Colleagues with significant leadership experience who are passionate about teaching and developing others and who can make an impact on people are the most successful. I usually describe this trait as being distinctive. They have a definite style, are passionate, have beliefs they hold firmly, and convictions they strongly represent, aligning closely with ours. We can teach them the content and the training methodology. You won't like all the kids, of course not. And you know that the hardest ones will never be absent, never. You won't like all of them, and the tough ones show up for a reason. The connection is important. Making connections. And while you don't have to like them all, what's important is they can never know that. Adds Rita Pearson, showing that she operates with a sense of reality and is a true born educator. With grading and judging, I am still waiting for someone to convincingly explain how grading or assigning numerical judgments facilitates learning. There's no question that feedback, especially descriptive and substantive feedback, is essential to understand where we stand. Imagine your loved one cooks Sunday lunch for the family. You feel the soup is a bit salty, but the breaded chicken is simply perfect, crispy coating, excellent texture inside. You can decide whether to give feedback or not. If the cook also noticed the soup is salty, there's no need to rub it in. However, if you choose to give feedback, you can help him or her use less salt next time and reinforce the perfect breading technique. But what does it add if you tell your partner that the breaded chicken is rated a 5 and the soup a 3? Does this provide more or more useful information? Not at all. This is precisely how useful grading is in students' lives and even in workplace performance evaluations, where it mostly causes problems and internal tension. Furthermore, the threat of graded recitations and tests is a significant source of stress. As Barbara Oakley notes, stress weakens the octopus of attention's ability to connect everything. That's why our brain doesn't work well when we are angry, nervous, or afraid. In the business world, performance ratings were introduced by large corporations a few decades ago, and ironically, those who created them have already discarded the practice. However, it remains prevalent among slower reacting followers, meaning most companies. This method has several flaws. The biggest problem, as confirmed by numerous studies, is that people are not very reliable when it comes to numerical evaluations of others. There is a stronger correlation between the ratings given by evaluators than between the ratings of the same employees by different evaluators. Thus, the data tells more about the evaluators than the evaluated. A strict manager or teacher will rate everyone lower, while a lenient one will overrate. If we ask multiple teachers or managers to assess someone's performance, the evaluations typically show significant variation. A recent local study among Hungarian language teachers working both inside and outside the country found that students speaking with a dialect are consistently rated lower, even if the responses in the experiment were deliberately constructed to ensure that the standard language speakers were of poorer quality. This happens despite no intentional linguistic discrimination. And how many other subconscious biases might there be? The second issue, especially in the workplace, is that everyone except those with the highest grades will be dissatisfied, especially if they find out what grades others received. Many will feel their rating is unfair. The situation worsens if companies impose quotas, forced distribution, specifying the proportion of high and low grades to be given. This puts managers in a difficult position both in making decisions and justifying them. Performance, especially among knowledge workers, doesn't necessarily follow a normal distribution, but more likely fits a power law distribution. Thirdly, performance management discussions will focus on explaining and debating grades rather than providing useful substantive feedback. In school, it's crucial to know which tasks we got right and which we messed up. It's also important to know where we made mistakes. It's valuable information to know how many points we scored out of 100 on a test, or what needs to be corrected in an essay to improve its quality. To learn good spelling, incorrect words, or misused punctuation must be corrected. Self-testing is also a very effective learning method. But what is the point of knowing how our performance is subjectively rated on a 5-point scale? We've already seen our performance from the number of mistakes or the proportion of correct answers. And anyway, what's most important? That we eventually learn something or that our momentary state is graded? One could argue that grades are a tool of classic behaviorist reward-punishment motivation. However, it's a rather poor and low-efficiency tool. It's like regularly patting or disciplining a dog with a shovel. How often did you observe that students labeled as poor learners were motivated by bad grades to break out of their category? Did they learn the material better for the next tests or worry less about assessments? I suspect you more often saw good students stressing over whether they could maintain their high grades, with their hearts breaking if they couldn't. Many parents have completely unrealistic expectations, wanting their children to excel in all subjects regardless of their abilities. Even among American parents, known for praising their children a lot, more than 3/4 focus on the lower grades in the report card, not on the areas of strength where faster and more effective progress could be made. Building a motivational system on fear of poor performance and conditioning seems, to put it mildly, a dead end. Around 50 or 60 years ago, scholars in the field developed motivational theories that remain unrivaled today. Reward and punishment, and promise and threat, can indeed influence behavior effectively in certain cases. However, another school of thought suggests that humans are also strongly motivated by their intrinsic needs. Besides existential and social drivers, everyone has a need for growth, both materially and personally, to varying degrees. People want to learn more about things they are interested in or have their curiosity sparked about. They also want to become increasingly skilled in desirable areas, even in those with no practical necessity, whether it's juggling a soccer ball, shooting hoops, solving a Rubik's Cube, hitting the right pitch, or slaying zombies in a video game. The mere power of progress is motivating, seeing something improve or accomplishing an increasing portion of a task. This is what progress bars, badges, and level-ups in video games rely on. Of course, social reinforcement can also give a significant boost, but there are many ways to achieve this beyond grades. To name a few, sharing measurable performance data, expressing gratitude, giving praise privately or publicly, and showing appreciation through recognition, promotion, responsibility, belt rank, higher pay, or status symbol benefits. People are also internally motivated to self-actualize in areas that suit them, provided they find these areas and become more proficient in their field of interest. Moreover, working towards significant goals that extend beyond themselves can be a powerful motivator, especially when done collaboratively, having a substantial impact. For example, our children aren't keen on making their own snack sandwiches. However, they have no objection to starting their school day on Fridays by making sandwiches for homeless people, which are then distributed by volunteers from the Budapest Bike Mafia. This program has been running for years. Altruism exists in many of us. We enjoy helping each other without any compensation. In fact, we engage in numerous activities on a goodwill basis that we wouldn't do for money. Daniel Pink, researching the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers, concluded that 3 factors are very important. 2 of these have already been mentioned: purpose and mastery, the desire to become increasingly proficient in our areas of interest. He also identified a critical 3rd factor in his book Drive, which is autonomy. People are autonomous beings who like to make their own decisions and organize their lives independently. The more opportunities we provide for this in school and the workplace, the better we tap into this motivational fuel tank. The classic, paternalistic, authoritarian approach in education and work goes precisely in the opposite direction. Grading and rating are emblematic tools of the all-knowing, omnipotent, superior caste's top-down judgment. Our own children have been attending school for several years without being graded. Without grades, they still strive to meet expectations, do what is asked of them, and complete their homework. They aim to perform as well as possible according to their abilities, and it's not typical of them to produce shoddy, careless work. Are they among the best in everything? Of course not. But they can determine this without grades because one has classmates who are faster at math, and the other has peers who are better at reading and writing. Ultimately, it's irrelevant because what matters for each child is continuous progress relative to their own previous performance. And are all children equally diligent? No. Motivation to learn and basic abilities vary just as much as in regular schools with grading. Instead of grades, we receive a detailed report describing the child's work in class, their life and behavior in the community, and a paragraph on each subject from the teacher's observations. I have never missed a grade at the end. However, producing such a report is undoubtedly much more work. As previously mentioned, in the business world, the phase-out of numerical or word-based performance ratings from performance management systems has begun. By 2015, articles with titles and content such as "It's time to scrap performance ratings" appeared in reputable management journals like the Harvard Business Review and Strategy Plus Business. Although it will take some time for this cleansing fire to spread through the many grading-infected companies and other organizations worldwide, it will eventually be eradicated. I fear that it will take longer in public education, although there are promising signs. In an online course I mentioned, co-hosted by a Canadian and a U.S. university, instead of grades, I received percentage scores on tests. The individual knowledge tests and the exam were weighted, culminating in an overall result. To avoid failing, one needed to score at least 70% on each and in total, but you could retake the tests and the final exam multiple times. I ultimately scored 96%. This clearly indicated that I comfortably surpassed the threshold. A grade-based evaluation wouldn't have added anything to the feedback. As I haven't taken other courses, I'm not sure how widespread this practice is in MOOCs, but I suspect it's not unique. There is also a good local example of a middle ground solution that satisfies both needs. Tibor Priyavara, formerly an innovative English teacher at Madak High School and later at the LT Tamas Cservenyak Practice School, used gamification years ago to remove the demotivating daily impact of grading while still meeting teachers' expectations. But let's see how he described the method in an interview. The key is to organize the work so that students want to work on their own. I developed a system for this. I divided the school year into 3 to 4 week cycles. In each cycle, students don't work for grades but collect points. The goal is to collect 16 points in 3 weeks to get an A. You have to give grades and evaluate with grades at the end of the year. How they earn points is up to the students. I give them opportunities: vocabulary tests, reports, presentations, essays. These earn points, but they can also come up with their own ideas for earning points. The most important feature of this system is that it doesn't include negative evaluations. There's a public Excel sheet where everyone can see each other's points. A competitive spirit develops, and they often collect not just 16, but 20 to 30 points, the highest being 45 points so far. Some are interested in history, so I give them a book in English to report on. Some translate parts of a book they've written in Hungarian into English. There are countless ways to earn points. When asked about the effectiveness of this method, it was revealed that by 10th grade, almost everyone has an intermediate state language exam, and by graduation, they typically reach an advanced level. He is not alone in such endeavors, and this can work in subjects beyond language teaching. In his book, The 21st Century Teacher, 7 educators from various schools, high school, vocational school, primary school, shared their experiences with point systems in mathematics, literature, history, Spanish, and biology, as well as in lower primary grades. Notably, all regularly sought feedback from students, continually refining their systems and incorporating many suggestions from the children. In many areas, I find grading and examinations entirely unnecessary, since the primary purpose of learning should be to acquire knowledge, develop skills, and change behavior, not to pass exams, earn percentages, or receive grades. While acknowledging that final exams have their place, such as for obtaining certain qualifications or licenses, this should not be the main focus of training and education. Maintaining unproductive learning habits. While we tend to believe that we make decisions in life after careful consideration, it's more common for our behavior, thinking, and actions to be governed by our habits. Our brains like to save energy, so they create routines to trigger automatic reactions in various situations. We employ hundreds of such routines every day. Interestingly, our brains store these habits differently from our memories. Our habits, good and bad, are stored in the brain's basal ganglia, close to the brainstem involved in many basic functions. The habit loop begins with a cue, when the brain switches to automatic mode, followed by a routine, a physical, mental, emotional reaction, or specific action, and ends with a reward. Habits are powerful, and our brains cling to them tightly. They can form unconsciously, but can also be deliberately shaped. Eradicating bad habits completely is challenging. Instead, we can change the routine between the cue and the reward. By recognizing the cue and deciding to implement the new behavior, we use our limited willpower primarily to initiate the new routine. There are also keystone habits that influence other habits. For instance, regular exercise has been observed to bring changes in unrelated behavior patterns. Those who exercise regularly tend to eat healthier, work more efficiently, smoke less, are more patient with colleagues and family, use their credit cards less often, and feel less stressed. Developing self-control and strengthening our willpower muscles change our mindset. We learn to better regulate impulsive actions. It's also interesting to note that when we ask someone to do something requiring self-control, they find it less burdensome if they feel personally involved, see themselves in a decision-making role, or are helping someone else. Conversely, if they feel they are just following orders, their willpower depletes faster. When students or colleagues feel like collaborators, when they feel they have some control and can make real decisions, they invest more energy and attention in their work. Procrastination, on the other hand, is a widespread habit that negatively impacts learning activities. When we don't want to do something, the brain areas associated with pain are activated. The natural reaction is for our brain to redirect our attention to eliminate the unpleasant stimulation. Interestingly, research indicates that shortly after starting an undesirable task, the neural discomfort fades away. Focusing on the process rather than the outcome is also a good strategy. Instead of being overwhelmed by the enormous elephant we have to eat, we cut it into plate-sized pieces and feed them to ourselves. Or we commit to working on the task for just 20 to 30 minutes at a time, taking breaks in between. When I took the Learning How to Learn online course offered jointly by McMaster University and the University of California, San Diego, it became evident that the prevailing learning habits in higher education support neither effective knowledge acquisition nor long-term memory retention. It seems that college and university students' routines specifically aim to prevent their brains from learning permanently. During the semesters, students mainly engage in information downloading, with little meaningful activity related to the material. Occasionally, they have to submit papers or take tests, somewhat connected to the course material or entirely different information sources. During exam periods, students face an overwhelming amount of literature to read, so they resort to cramming notes from previous year's students a few days before the exam, getting a few hours of sleep, and then somehow passing the test. Afterward, they quickly forget everything to tackle the next series of exams. Everything I summarized at the beginning of the book about effective learning based on neuroscience is utterly contrary to the higher education learning habits. Viewed from this perspective, the notion that higher education institutions teach students how to learn is bizarre. They don't teach effective and long-term learning. According to neuroscientist Tamas Cservenyak, you must avoid cramming because it doesn't create stable neural patterns. My own children attend an alternative school, not out of some fancy whim or because we found it fashionable. While expecting our first child, we stumbled upon the first episode of a documentary series on alternative pedagogical approaches on TV and then watched the entire series. I was amazed by what was happening in these schools, what the children did during school days, and how students of various grades responded to the reporter's questions. I decided then that if I found a way, we would seek something similar for our future children, hoping school would be a different experience for them than it was for me. When the time came, We visited several schools' open days in our area, listened to how they thought about teaching, and chose the school whose principles and methodological concepts aligned with my professional beliefs. Honestly, it was the only school where I heard any principles or concepts at all. The other schools talked about completely different things during their open days, least of all about children and teaching. In this school, the first months were about establishing cooperation habits so that a group of children could engage in collective learning activities for half a day. These routines and rituals give children a sense of security, reducing the need for constant directing and disciplining. Everyone knows what follows the various cues, what they will do next. They practice numerous activities daily, strengthening the related neural pathways and thereby promoting effective learning. The bar is gradually and individually raised in several areas over time, providing a foundation for deliberate practice. There is a rhythmic part of the day that involves physical movement combined with recitation or counting, regular writing practice, drawing, singing, and playing the recorder. Memorization happens through a large number of scheduled repetitions, not by being told to go home and memorize in the evening. Even very young children can remember surprisingly large amounts of text this way. Due to continuous, regular activities, all class members, regardless of manual dexterity or musicality, learn to draw or play the recorder quite well. There are daily discussion sessions on various topics related to children's everyday lives, interests, or current study material, allowing them to connect new knowledge to their existing information blocks and get used to verbal expression in a non-stressful, emotionally safe environment. If teachers see that children are tired of concentrating, they switch activities instead of continuing to push the content. They are constantly moving, frequently rearranging the classroom according to the activities. These focus shifts match the attention spans typical of their age group. As the years progress, especially in upper grades, the amount of study material increases and the pace of processing quickens. Each grade prepares performances for other classes and parents several times a year, becoming longer and more sophisticated over time. I'm not saying everything is perfect in the school. However, it's clear that there is a concept that aligns with developmental psychology principles year by year. Teaching methods fit the neurological conditions for effective learning. Teachers generally maintain children's attention, and the kids mostly enjoy being in school. When asked if they like going to school, the answers are mixed. However, it's telling that even when they are sick, they don't want to stay home. So, when planning any learning process, whether for children or adult training participants, it should include and reinforce habits that favor lasting effectiveness. In previous chapters, I've detailed several important factors: the amount of material, the realities of sustained attention, the interplay of focused and diffuse thinking, individual differentiation, the variety of activities, participant engagement, understanding through action, extensive spaced repetition, context creation, rest and sleep, the quality of teacher-student relationships, and genuinely valuable feedback. These can all be turned into teaching methods and learning habits that positively influence effectiveness. It's up to you to decide which ones to start focusing on. Epilogue: prepared for life. How many times have you heard the cliché that school should prepare us for life? Probably more than a few. And indeed, it would be great if it were true. I'd even extend it to say that workplace training should prepare us to navigate our work and personal lives more successfully and effectively. But despite this wisdom being regularly parroted, there isn't much action to back it up. If we look into what international researchers say are the necessary skills for the modern workplace, we'll find very different items on the list than those typically honed in education. One notable study is the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum, a nonprofit organization established in Switzerland, which lists the top skills needed in today's workplace. Other studies reach similar conclusions. How can these skills be developed in both public education and various corporate training programs? Here's a big reveal. They need to be practiced, repeatedly, over a long period, with the bar gradually raised. Let's look at some examples of how this can be done. Collaboration and teamwork. It's probably no surprise that our ability to collaborate improves when we frequently cooperate with others towards a common goal. This can start with various group tasks and then move on to increasingly complex projects. Don't be scared of the term project. It refers to work done in multiple steps, often not independently, with a beginning and an end, resulting in a product, whether intellectual or physical. With children, start with small projects, like a short presentation or craft work, and then progress to more complex ones. High school students can excel in staging full-length plays or preparing robots for sumo wrestling tournaments. Seriously, I didn't make this up. Begin with pair work, especially with a partner they know and like, and then move to larger teams, including less familiar or even unknown classmates, adults, and colleagues, with gradually decreasing teacher or leader oversight. This can include developing their own ideas, turning them into plans, and then implementing those plans. Critical thinking students or adult learners' critical thinking won't develop if an all-knowing person always tells them the ultimate truth, which they have to accept and repeat back. Critical thinking is cultivated by examining topics from multiple angles. We need to ask ourselves how rational an argument seems. Are there logical leaps in the written or spoken content? Do we assume cause and effect relationships where there's only correlation? If so, on what basis? Are there evidence and data supporting the explanation? How credible are the sources? What might be the communicator's intention? What is the scope of the data collection? What can we conclude with certainty, and what is speculation? Regularly asking such questions of ourselves and others will help ensure we don't believe something just because it was on TV or we read it on the internet. Problem solving. Our problem-solving skills can certainly develop from working on various maths, physics, or chemistry calculations. However, in life, we often face different kinds of obstacles. Any task or activity that involves understanding a problem, identifying or excluding underlying causes, gathering, evaluating, or testing possible solutions, building a sequence of actions, and implementing it will help develop problem-solving skills. Ready-made answers don't help. In school and at work, we often encounter various problems, often not technical but human. It's worth asking who among the children, trainees, or colleagues would like to explore the topic, think through the possibilities, and make a proposal. The more such situations arise, the more natural it becomes for everyone to address problems with proactive solutions rather than complaining and waiting for others to solve them. Creativity. Contrary to popular belief, creativity isn't about artistic prodigies producing something astounding. It's more about imagining something, outlining it, filling in the details, and coloring the picture. If needed, erasing back some parts and trying again multiple times. Creativity is valuable not only in the arts, but also in work, where we can invent new products, design more efficient workflows, create tools to ease or speed up activities, or produce communication materials to aid information sharing or persuasion. 3 ways to develop creativity include: 1. Simply using our creative power more often by realizing our ideas or helping others with theirs. 2. Engaging in artistic activities, which typically boost creative enthusiasm, even at an amateur level, whether it's writing, music, dance, performing, or visual arts. And 3. Exploring new fields, sciences, or professional artwork, as creativity often springs from applying something seen or experienced in a new context later on. Educators and workplace trainers can facilitate all 3 by planning learning processes that consider these opportunities. Writing skills. Our writing skills improve through practice and substantive feedback. Throughout life and work, we need to produce texts of varying lengths and functions. Writing a few words, a few paragraphs, or a 1 or 2 page summary requires different approaches, and an essay requires another. Sometimes we need to articulate our thoughts, summarize experiences, or distill the essence from ready-made materials or literature. Improving in creating various types of texts requires much practice. Feedback from experts could be used to revise and refine the text multiple times. As we do this, our writing skills improve, and our knowledge deepens and strengthens as a side effect. Active listening, verbal communication, and negotiation skills. Although almost everyone can speak, not many are effective communicators or successful negotiators. Learning to listen attentively, Regularly summarizing what we understand from our conversation partners is half the battle. Paraphrasing helps synchronize the understanding between participants, drastically reducing misunderstandings. We have two ears and one mouth for a reason, to use them in proportion. If students regularly have the opportunity to speak, rather than just the teacher talking, they can practice verbalizing their thoughts within the learning group. It's also great if the teacher demonstrates active listening, summarizing, forming concise messages, clearly communicating requests, needs, and expectations, sharing facts and observations rather than opinions and judgments, using clarifying questions, and applying assertive I statements in problem or conflict situations. Beyond demonstrating, it's also crucial for teachers to steer, mentor, and, when needed, mediate without bias. The communication patterns that become habitual in a community are critical. Emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman defines emotional intelligence as recognizing and naming our own emotional states, managing and controlling these emotions, being empathetic with others, forming and maintaining normal relationships, and motivating ourselves. Whether we like it or not, we can't leave our emotions at the factory gate or school entrance. However, it is beneficial not to be at the mercy of our emotions, not to be puppets pulled by strings. This requires that emotions be a regular subject of everyday conversations. It should be okay for someone to feel scared, angry, desperate, disappointed, enthusiastic, happy, or hopeful. Name your feelings and encourage others to do so to expand your emotional vocabulary. It's not shameful but admirable if someone apologizes and steps aside for a quarter hour to pull themselves together. Practice tuning into others' emotional states while listening to them. In one-on-one conversations with students, help them recognize what motivates them, what is important to them, their ambitions, and where they feel comfortable. This supports them in finding their internal drives. Leadership. Leadership today is not about command and control, and far from being exclusive to those with leadership titles. Engineers and experts informally guide others' work, and many employees are given project tasks requiring them to coordinate colleagues from various fields. Teachers and trainers at work also lead their learning groups, and in schools, they also engage with parent communities. Volunteer organizations need leaders to initiate and steer teams toward goals. Even organizing a good party or ensuring the dinner is ready before everyone starves requires a leader. This role need not always fall to the same person. Different activities can inspire different individuals. It's helpful to have role models demonstrating leadership behaviors that can be considered normal. This includes setting meaningful, motivating, and achievable goals, involving others, regularly monitoring progress, providing practical feedback on performance and behavior, building relationships, being curious about others, planning for future development, discussing long-term possibilities and directions, creating opportunities, raising the bar, connecting with others, helping remove obstacles, and sharing successes. Having a good teacher, coach, or boss once in life increases the likelihood of adopting their leadership style. In conclusion, teaching, whether for children or corporate training participants, should foster habits and behaviors that align with the skills needed for success in modern life and work. The goal is to build a foundation that prepares learners not just for tests and grades, but for real-world challenges and opportunities. By integrating collaborative projects, critical thinking exercises, problem-solving activities, creative pursuits, effective communication practices, emotional intelligence development, and leadership experiences, we can create a more holistic and practical approach to education and people development. Whether planning school or workplace training programs, it's worth considering how to support participants' skill development in areas that seem most important today. Also, in professional training, you have the opportunity to shape the methodology used so that you don't just try to pass on knowledge, but also contribute to the development of one or another key skill as a side effect of the activities carried out during the training. In the 21st century, we no longer expect a gas station to merely fill our fuel tank. Utopia and the 10 Commandments. When I close my eyes, a beautiful, colorful, and fragrant picture is projected onto my inner movie screen, which will likely seem quite utopian to you. I see children and adults marching towards school or the training location with good cheer, without anxiety or fear, filled with positive anticipation. They can be sure that they will gain something more today, and no one will humiliate them, put them in an undignified position, pigeonhole, judge, or bore them to death. The day passes quickly, interestingly, variably, actively. They understand what is being discussed, dare to ask if something is unclear, and can voice their objections. No one expects them to perform equally well in all areas. Individual talents and strengths are recognized and actively supported in their development. Areas where they are less proficient are not given up on. Instead, they strive to achieve an acceptable basic level for everyone. Teaching is not just about imparting knowledge, but also involves meaningful practice. In workplace training, significant emphasis is placed on integrating the material into daily work and reflecting on the experiences. Educators show genuine interest in each of their students and look for ways to support their further development from their current position. Personalized goals are created, and students receive substantial, meaningful feedback on their performance. Both children and adults learn not for grades or passing exams, but to become smarter and more skilled, acquiring useful knowledge and abilities. To ensure this is not just a dream, I summarize below the 10 principles whose neglect I have criticized in the earlier chapters of this book. The 10 Commandments for Human Beings. Teaching human beings. Have a clear concept for the entire program. Training day and training session. Remember, less is more. Teach half as much as you originally planned. Carefully select what is worth teaching. Filter based on age, prior knowledge, actual usability, and your teaching goals. Define the minimum level, but teach differentiated. Help those who need more support, but give ammunition to the best to climb the steps 2 at a time. Consider people's limited attention span. Strive for methodological diversity. Engage participants in very different activities. Provide opportunities for gaining experiences, working together, and spread your enthusiasm to your students. Create opportunities for deliberate practice, continuously raising the bar. Build and maintain human relationships with your students. Give regular descriptive feedback instead of rating and judging. Support your students in developing beneficial learning habits. It was easy to write down roughly what needs to be done, but it is much harder to figure out how to implement these in your specific field and with your target learners. However, if you take the effort, you will be able to figure it out. Fortunately, there have been and still are schools, courses, teachers, trainers, coaches, and workplace leaders who act according to the principles listed. Unfortunately, they are still in the minority. Many educational researchers, training experts, and psychologists have previously expressed what needs to be changed. Eva Gyarmathy, the award-winning psychologist and senior research fellow at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, summarized in a 2018 article how a good school definitely does not look. Students sit in rows, focus on one topic for 45 minutes. Everyone learns the same material regardless of their interests. Learning happens from textbooks instead of real experiences. Outdated material is taught, the teacher lectures the material, and tests are used to assess students' knowledge. Instead, the ideal school is characterized by communication, cooperation, social situations, frameworks, jointly established rules, diversity, initiative, the opportunity to choose, creativity, creative activities, critical thinking, interpretation, creating one's own knowledge. I would add that all these observations are equally relevant in the corporate training field. When you help your children learn at home, you can make the joint effort much more effective and productive by following a few basic principles. For example, dealing with a topic for 10 minutes every working day is more valuable than 50 minutes on a single day of the week, or reviewing the material the night before they need to remember it. Re-explaining something multiple times is less effective than having the child summarize what they have understood so far. Kids instinctively tend to vocalize their understanding, which greatly aids comprehension. Your next explanation then only needs to clarify as necessary. Regular physical activity, as well as taking breaks between study sessions to clear and refresh the mind with different activities, are essential. Progress in small steps ensures more stable and lasting learning. Do not do it for them. let them do it themselves. Children can often start tasks surprisingly well without having every step spoon-fed to them. Before giving feedback, it is worth asking whether the child wants it, if they would like you to correct their spelling mistakes, for example, or if they need advice on their work. In my experience, they are much more open to our observations and less likely to get offended if we don't offer unsolicited advice. Avoid rating the product. Instead, give descriptive feedback on what was good and what you think should be done differently. Accept their differing opinions, especially in situations where there isn't a single correct answer or solution. Obviously, you need to be stricter with spelling, math, or physics rules, but where it isn't necessary, don't be. A well-structured daily schedule and the pre-planning of study tasks on a weekly and daily basis are also a great help. As I write these lines, we are in voluntary quarantine due to the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, so I have quite an intensive opportunity to practice these daily. Working in a normal routine makes this more challenging, but the essence of building good habits is that eventually the child will be able to follow the habit on their own because it becomes natural for them. In a workplace setting, for those who are not professional educators, trainers, or development specialists, the need to train or instruct others professionally typically arises only occasionally. The process should definitely not start by clicking on the PowerPoint icon. The most critical step for them is to first select the necessary information that must be conveyed and can be immediately used. Leave supplementary information for later. Teach in smaller, more frequent segments rather than one long session. At least half of the training should be active for the participants, with the instructor speaking for the other half at most. Alternate between lecture and practice every 15 to 20 minutes. It is also advisable to get to know the trainees a little bit, partly due to the relational nature of learning, and partly to better understand the context in which the new knowledge will be used. Additionally, it is very useful to become aware of any possible resistance or fears. Even in professional training, thinking in processes rather than single actions and miracle expectations is essential. There need to be follow-up training and monitoring sessions where progress can be tracked and inevitable problems and obstacles can be addressed. This whole process is not sorcery. It just needs to be thoroughly thought through, a concept created, and the experiences and lessons learned from the implementation incorporated into the next training sessions. Maybe this little ebook will also contribute to reaching the critical mass and tipping the scales someday. Until then, let's just move forward step by step. If you start applying even a single principle you haven't used before in one training session, your program will already be better. The sense of success will encourage you to continue what you have started, and thus you will become a better prepared, more impactful trainer day by day. Besides the effectiveness and satisfaction of your students, an important side effect will be that more and more people will experience, even through you, that teaching can be done differently. Hopefully, this will be natural for our grandchildren. Contact for the future. I hope you found this ebook helpful. Feel free to share the download links with anyone who might benefit from it. If you're a senior leader or HR director and would like the Act to Manage team to assist with leadership development that truly result in behavioral change, please reach out to us by email at cservenyak.tamas@menedsmentor.com. Act to Manage is a boutique firm specializing in enhancing employee engagement. Our philosophy centers on critical thinking, and we continuously refine our solutions with the latest insights from behavioral and neuroscience research to ensure measurable results. Our mission is to offer proven solutions to team leaders and managers that help them achieve excellence and sustainable performance. Visit our website at acttomanage.eu. About the author, Tamas Cservenyak has been working with leaders in various capacities for over 25 years. Together with his colleagues at Act to Manage, they have guided more than 150 groups through their 6-month deliberate leadership programs, working with both local and international manufacturing companies, IT and retail businesses, financial service providers, the SSC sector, and a Big Four audit firm. For 3 years, he was a member of the board of the International Coach Federation's Hungarian chapter, and in 2012, he served as the president of the local organization. Since 2010, he has been the author of a popular leadership blog and 6 ebooks on leadership and teaching. Previously, he worked as a KPMG Academy faculty member and served as managing partner at DBM Hungary. Connect with Tamas on LinkedIn. Doubling.com, Cservenyak Tamas.